History and Myth, Chapter 5, The Christian's Responsibility in Anti-Semitism. According to the Christian historical version, the Prefectus Judae Pontius Pilatus, the prefect of Judea Pilate, was compelled to liberate an outlaw, perhaps a revolutionary, as the Gospels depict him, instead of the preacher, because the people preferred Barabbas to Jesus. He even tried to implore the Jews, but they insisted, crying, "Crucify him, crucify him," and were resolute in their decision to liberate the outlaw, the fourth Gospel says the robber, and to let Romans execute the man who is said to have cured blind people and lepers. It is, of course, a topsy-turvy absurdity. Reasonable persons would find it much more logical for the robber to be executed, and a stay of execution granted the preacher, instead of the other way around. Also for an authoritarian stance to have been taken by the procurator instead of by the suppliant. Also for the people to have desired to set the healer and the preacher free rather than the thief. Something fraudulent is hidden behind this presentation. How many Christians have undertaken to study that historical period closely? How many have asked themselves whether the presumed custom of liberating a prisoner on the occasion of the Jewish holiday of Passover really existed or not? How many have read the works of the Jewish authors Philo and Josephus Flavius, Jesus' near contemporaries, or even know they exist? These two authors, who describe in detail customs and events in ancient Palestine, never mention such a custom and always depict Pilate as a cynical and hard procurator who never asked permission of anybody, and who, even less, ever submitted himself to the popular will of the Jews, but, on the contrary, always ruled with a strong hand and atrocious cruelty. The Pilate of the Gospels, in front of the shouting crowd, declares himself defeated and announces blamelessly, "I wash my hands, you are responsible for this innocent blood, not I," and then sets free a man many theologians want to identify as a revolutionary, one who fought the might of the Roman invaders. At this point, into the mouth of the Jews there has been put a sentence that is a real ideological manifesto. "Then answered all the people and said, His blood be on us and on our children." Matthew 27:25. This is the starting point of a 2,000 years old anti-Semitism. The Jews of Jesus' days seem aware of their fate and, what is more curious, ready to accept it. The terrible war against the Romans, the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, the massacre of hundreds of thousands of them, the diaspora, the persecutions perpetrated by the Christians, the Inquisition, the infamous name perfidious Jews. 2,000 years of oppression and extermination. Well then, here is a dramatic confirmation. The authors who composed the four Gospel texts, called canonical by the Church, meaning they are the only ones that evidence the truth, had without a doubt a fixed idea. They had to discredit the Hebrew race and cover it with shame for having wanted the death of the Son of God, so sanctifying and excusing Christianity's historically hostile attitude towards Judaism. Racism was generated and nourished by this inexpedient affirmation of the Gospel according to Matthew. Nevertheless, if the infamy of having killed the Lord belongs to anyone, it is not the Jews, but the Romans. Of that we can't be sure. In fact, they had invaded Palestine, incorporated it into the empire, and made its inhabitants subjects of the emperor. They painstakingly repressed every national religious rising, especially one in a country very difficult to subdue, a country where, for many centuries, prophecies had spoken of a Messiah king, son of David, who should repeat the deeds of the ancient sovereign who had created the united kingdom of the 12 tribes of Israel, a country where messianic movements, Essenes and Zealots had arisen and grown strong as never before. Chapter 6. The awaited Messiah. What on earth were the Gospel authors interested in hiding with their adulteration of the historical truth? That is exactly what we are looking for. The trouble is that the man Pilate's soldiers had arrested never wanted to found a new non-Judaic religion. He never thought of considering the ancient agreement between Yahweh and his people cancelled, nor did he ever preach to the non-circumcised. There are different explicit occasions in the New Testament in which Jesus speaks of his unequivocal resolve not to preach to non-Jews, but only rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Matthew 10:6. See also Matthew 15:21-28. He was born and grew up a Hebrew, and as a Hebrew he lived and died absolutely determined to remain such. Christos is anointed, a term that translates the Aramaic word Messiah, anointed into Greek. Christ has been made the Romans' butt on purpose, and the Romans tried and executed one so named because one of the messianic movements of Jesus' days, which were similar to the Essenic ones, if not identical to those of the Essenes who were installed at Khirbet Qumran, the authors of the famous and controversial Dead Sea Scrolls, identified in his person the fated one of whom the messianic prophecies spoke, the chosen of God, the son of David, the anointed of Yahweh, who was to return the house of Israel to its songs, taking it away from the pagan usurpers, away from the hated family of the Herodian monarchs, and away from the corrupt priestly caste of Sadducees. Such a man could not end his days but on the Roman gallows, the cross, with a trilingual inscription, on it. Melech ha-Yehudim, Basileus ton Judaium, Rex Judeorum, King of the Jews, whose meaning is more than evident, sentences to death because he was recognized guilty of rebellion against the imperial authority, since he attempted to re-establish David's crown on the throne of Israel. In fact, 1,000 years before, the first man to reign over the United 12 tribes of Israel was David, and he also made Jerusalem his capital city, and there he wanted to build a huge temple to the Lord. Not that he brought his project into being, but rather his son Solomon. David was the first Messiah, anointed king of Israel. And to the Jews, the idea that the Messiah united spiritual with political power causes no repugnance, exactly like to the Hindus the idea that the Mahatma Gandhi united spiritual with political power causes no repugnance. On the contrary, they have no problem accepting that he even be a warrior who fights and defeats all the enemies of God's nation. The term Messiah comes from the typical ceremony of regal investiture, unction or anointing. Mashiach is anointed. The king of Israel had not only political dignity, he was also to be the favorite of God, as he had particular faith and devotion to the Lord of Israel. He received from the hands of the high priest the ointment of myrrh, sweet cinnamon, spikenard, cassia, and olive oil, according to Exodus 30, 23, 24. And with it he was declared anointed of the Lord. That means